Let's talk the Harpers letter and cancel culture. On July 7, 2020, Harper's magazine posted a letter on justice and open debate. An open letter that was co-signed by hundreds of prominent authors, academics and journalists, all decrying their common shared sense that our popular discourse has gone down the toilet. And the letter starts off very strong. Our cultural institutions are facing a moment of trial. Powerful protests for racial and social justice are leading to overdue demands for police reform, along with wider calls for greater equality and inclusion across our society, not least in higher education, journalism, philanthropy, and the arts. Oh, who can't agree with that? Greater equality in media and society? Justice in our criminal justice system? Turns out the signees of the Harpers letter don't think too highly of their perceived consequences of said social justice. This needed reckoning has also intensified a new set of moral attitudes and political commitments that tend to weaken our norms of open debate and toleration of differences in favour of ideological conformity. As we applaud the first development, we also raise our voices against the second. So the letter is really about this cabal of rich, famous and powerful people suddenly scared that police reform will bring about, and I quote, its own brand of dogma or coercion. And the democratic inclusion that we want can be achieved if we speak out against the intolerant climate that has set upon on all sides. I get it now. This is really about
cancel culture.
Cancel culture critic.
Cancel culture, left and right,
is what's being called cancel culture.
Cancel culture.
Cancel culture.
People are getting cancelled. Who's next? Felix Schellberg.
So before we get back to the letter, let's dive into that a little bit. What is cancel culture? For the past 5 years, we've seen the rise of an entirely online phenomenon of the cancellation of celebrity. Much like how your favourite show runs its course after 8 or so seasons and the network puts it out to pasture, getting cancelled online takes the tired, worn-out stereotypes, bad jokes, and blatantly bigoted statements of celebrities and tries to force some actual consequences upon them. It started as a joke amongst fans of love and hip-hop New York.
Away from me. You canceled.
Canceled? You got me up. I'm not going nowhere.
I was just watching New Jack City the night before I met with her that day. So I think that's where the whole cancel came from. Cancel.
And it gradually rose in popularity as a way of signaling to other users that a celebrity's actions rendered them problematic and not worth your time or your money. It's an internet boycott. Or at least that's how Anne Charity Hudley, the chair of linguistics of African America at UC Santa Barbara, describes it. The concept of being cancelled is not new to black culture. It is a survival skill as old as the southern black use of the boycott. Everyone knows a story of a popular figure getting away with something because they are powerful, rich, famous, etc., etc. And within our capitalist system, we're constantly told to vote with our wallets. As Hudley describes, if you don't have the ability to stop something through political means, what you can do is refuse to participate. She goes on to describe cancelling as an act of individual protest, saying, when you see people cancelling Kanye, cancelling other people, it's a collective way of saying, we elevated your social status, your economic prowess, and we're not going to pay attention to you in a way that we once did. I may have no power, but the power I have is to ignore you. Now, surely there's no ardent free marketeer who can argue with the will of said market when it comes to this topic. Insert laugh track. Because there are lots of people willing to argue that cancel culture is a stain on society, on the discourse, on people's lives. And it's not because it started as a black-led societal movement, unlike what happens in the media to all other black-led social movements rich people really tend to hate. They hate it because it gives them the illusion of having to face consequences for their actions. Kevin Hart was meant to host the Oscars in 2019 until old jokes of his and tweets were found to feature homophobic slurs and jokes and disparaging comments about the LGBT community, and he was forced to step down from that position. Louis C.K. had many credible allegations of sexual harassment from multiple women, And so FX cancelled their 7-year-long business partnership with him. Michael Jackson and R. Kelly both faced high-profile documentaries detailing allegations of sexual assault throughout 2019, and Kelly is now in prison. And Jackson's image is certainly tarnished, but the keen of hearing would have heard me say that cancel culture gives the rich and powerful the illusion of having faced consequences. And that is almost entirely accurate. With the exception of deplatforming, an entirely separate act whereby a figure or group is denied access to the online resources that kept their group or brand alive, cancelling someone has no real effect on their lives or their careers. Kevin Hart lost the Oscars, but his following Netflix special, which came out 3 months later, was incredibly popular, and he was in the top 20 highest grossing movie stars of 2019, and he's in the top 10 for 2020. Louis C.K.'s cancellation lasted a whole 10 months before he was once again selling out comedy shows, speaking about and joking about his cancellation. Jackson and Kelly's reputations are irreparably damaged, but throughout the airing of those 2 documentaries, music streams on sites such as Spotify and Apple Music went up. Dave Chappelle called it celebrity hunting season in his Netflix special, An Ode to Punching Down. But so far, the only people who face actual, real consequences as a result of faceless, angry online internet mobs are the women who come forward with accusations of assault. Cancel culture is not a threat to democracy and free speech in the way that the signees of the Harpers letter seem to think it is. So why has it been written? Well, let's look at the names of some of those signees and see if we can glean a view into their thought patterns. One name that immediately jumps out is full-time TERF and occasional hack, J.K. Rowling, who has had her reputation as a role model for young women everywhere, tarnished, because she is a major transphobe who doesn't believe that trans people exist, so it isn't difficult to see why she would want to sign on to a letter proclaiming, "It is now all too common to hear calls for swift and severe retribution in response to perceived transgression of speech and thought," considering it's her anti-scientific thoughts that have got her thrown in the sin bin with her main audience. Her signature is understandable. Her inclusion also seems to have caused 2 of the signees, historian Kerry Greenidge and author Jennifer Finley Bowlen, to disavow it soon after it was released. Now, who else? Right. Columnists for the New York Times, Barry Weiss, David Brooks, Michelle Goldberg, and Jennifer Senior, signing onto a letter screaming that the way to defeat bad ideas is by exposure, argument, and persuasion, not by trying to silence or wish them away. After their former op-ed editor James Bennett allowed a hateful, racist, and autocratic screed by Arizona Senator Tom Cotton to be published in their paper, seemingly without argument or persuasion. Just, exposure. Like a good editor would. Never mind the fact that Weiss spent her undergraduate years trying to get Arab academics at her alma mater fired for criticising Israeli settlement in Palestine, and Brooks has already referred to cancel culture as destroying people's lives akin to the Rwandan genocide. It seems par for the course that them to sign on to a vague and obtuse letter describing the greatest threat to democracy right now as lefty Twitter mobs, when a literal autocrat occupies the White House and police are violently shooting people in the streets. I understand that image may evoke police with guns, but occasionally it's sandbags and tear gas and other things that violate the Geneva Convention, but it doesn't count as a war. The letter reads as a list of the American liberal elite, both social and classical versions, in their campaign for total civility in the discourse. To them, if a message can't be delivered in a sternly worded letter to the editor, then the intentions must be sinister. If a protest kicks over a bin, the movement itself is violent, and their message corrupt. If your spokesperson isn't a college-educated white person speaking the Queen's English, you're a hick, a criminal, or an Antifa thug. While on the face of it, it is a call for action, and the end of censorship of opinion. It's really about the protection of the elites from the consequences of their actions. And as we've covered, the consequences aren't dire by any means. We're protecting the elites from embarrassment, and we are othering socially conscious progressive voices, turning them into an idea that the media can rail against. It's the 90s and political correctness all over again. I've covered this in an earlier video, but just as a brief reminder, predominantly right-wing personalities are looking at something that young, racially diverse, sexually diverse, gender diverse groups are using to get a foothold in society and fight back at the forces that are keeping them down, and they are demonizing both of them. And the movement itself, by twisting it into something unrecognizable that the vast majority of people seemingly won't like. And that's why the Harpers letter and the trend of civility over progress is damaging to the discourse and our society, not cancel culture. Prioritizing your energy fighting young progressives isn't a new thing in the media. Young progressives don't write the paychecks for all of these incredibly rich people. But when you've got open fascists in power around the world, it seems remarkably disingenuous to aim all of your energy at protesters and Twitter mobs. Is your power, your position more important to you than people's lives? There's no easy solution to this either. How do you solve a problem that has the backing of all major media outlets? Be a conscious consumer. Don't pay for media that perpetrates obviously false or harmful narratives. It's quite difficult. It's most of them. I think you have to take an individual micro solution away from this. As much as I'd love to see worker-owned media cooperatives rise around the globe, for now, we just have to push back at the harmful rhetoric in our own circle. So if you see someone in your close circle start to talk about how people just can't make jokes anymore because they'll get cancelled, yeah, well, what happened to my favourite comedian? You know why that's a bit of bollocks. Their favourite comedian probably just released a Netflix special called Triggered.